I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Last Call for Wednesday, the 3rd of June. I'll be back with Heads Up Thursday, 10 a.m. To dairy prices. Dairy product prices fell in the latest GDT auction, hitting the lowest level in nearly 6 years amid concern about the end of European milk quotas, Russia's trading embargo and sluggish Chinese demand. The GDT average winning prices slid 4.3% to US 2412, down from 2472 at the previous auction 2 weeks ago. It was the lowest level since August 2009. Some almost 28,000 tonnes of product was sold, up from 26,500 tonnes of product 2 weeks ago. Agri-HQ dairy analyst Susan Kilsby said in a note the fall in GDT prices was not expected. Before the auction, the NZX dairy futures market had anticipated that milk powder prices would rise. However, Ms Kilsby says it appears buyers did not share that positive sentiment. The Agri-HQ seasonal farmgate milk price for the 2015-16 season increased 3 cents to $5.63 a kilogram of milk solids following the latest GDT auction. The Agri-HQ seasonal farmgate milk price for the 2014-15 season has been revised up 2 cents to $4.52. This increase was solely due to the weaker New Zealand dollar. The New Zealand dollar is trading near the lowest level against the greenback in almost 5 years, amid expectations that the US Federal Reserve will lift interest rates this year. Butter slid 10%, and Hydrus milk fat dropped 7.4%. Butter milk powder fell 7%, while lactose declined 6.9%. Rennet casing shed 4%. Whole milk powder fell 3.1% to US 2309 a tonne, and skim milk powder slipped 1.3%. Cheddar sold at US 3055 a tonne, up from 2745 at the previous auction 2 weeks ago. Sweet whey powder was not offered in the latest event. Ms Kilby said it was surprising to see such weak results for the milk fat products because in the US and European markets there is steady support for butter. New Zealand butter and AMF is currently the world's cheapest source of milk fat. The New Zealand dollar last traded 1.3% higher at 71.86 US cents at about 132 in New York, compared with 70.93 at 5 yesterday. There were 115 winning bidders out of 148 participating bidders at the 12-round auction. The number of qualified bidders fell to 642, down from 687 at the last auction. Let'sTalk.com. The Attorney General has launched a Court of Appeal bid to send Kim.com's computers and other devices to the US, following a Supreme Court ruling that found the warrants for their seizure weren't illegal. Last December, the court ruled the search warrants executed in the high-profile 2012 raid on the internet entrepreneur were valid, although Chief Justice Sean Elias issued a dissenting view. Appearing via teleconference in the Court of Appeal before Justices Alan France, Tony Randerson and Douglas White yesterday, Merrin Cook from the Crown Law Office sought to quash restrictions on sending the devices to the US, which he argued were only in place while they waited on the Supreme Court decision. Mr. .com and his co-accused Finn Batato, Matthias Ortman and Bram van der Kolk sought to have the warrants ruled invalid as they attempt to head off the US federal government's bid to extradite them to the US, where they face charges of conspiracy to operate websites used to illegally distribute copyrighted material. They're currently appealing the date of their extradition hearing, which is set down for September. Yesterday, Mr. .com's lawyer Ron Mansfield told the court the devices should not leave New Zealand's jurisdiction, saying it seems to be placing a high level of trust in American authorities. Mr. .com wants access to his devices for an expert to check they haven't been Trojanized by US authorities before they were seized, a practice that Mr. Mansfield told the justices was commonly used by the FBI. The judge has indicated directions are expected to be issued shortly.
NBR Radio on Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me Jason Walls. Jason, talking Aussie interest rates yesterday, the Reserve Bank of Australia leaving its cash rate unchanged. I guess no surprises there.
No, not really. Not from the market, not for analysts, not from myself. Basically, everybody said there was going to be no cuts. We saw a cut last month from 2.25 down to 2. And it was always very unlikely that they'd do it again. And in fact, practically nobody was thinking this after they cut it in February, which was a bit of a surprise. In fact, it was quite a surprise. Everybody was sort of on like interest rate high alert. And then it was expected to be cut in May. Most punters and analysts said, yep, this is going to happen. But yesterday, there was no real shocks when it came to the actual non-movement of the interest rate.
Anything in the policy statement that caught your interest?
Well, this is always the interesting thing that I'm finding around these sort of announcements, is it's a lot of the time it's how things are worded, and there are things that they say that really put markets into a frenzy, or they can just say, well, what's going on here, just with a couple of phrases. And the thing that kind of has been standing out for me about this statement is the fact that they were talking about how there was no forward-looking, and the Reserve Bank didn't have it. The statement didn't say that it was forward-looking to cut any more sort of rates. So I was talking to a punter from TD Securities, and they were saying that it was actually extremely unlikely that the RBA wouldn't signal more cuts to come. So they were saying that they were probably going to signal that there were more coming. And of course, we saw in the announcement yesterday that they basically just said we're leaving the rates at 2 and didn't really go into any more detail around if there is any more to come. And so I got some more information from the same company this morning, and they were saying like, this is a bit of a surprise. We didn't expect them to cut the rates, but we did expect them to have some further guidance to say not now, but potentially in the future. But there was nothing really around that. But in saying that, it's always really important to look at the data around these sort of things. Let's just shift to the other side of the world really quickly with the US. One of the things that they're sort of holding at the moment before they increase their interest rates is they're looking at the data around inflation and employment, and they're wanting to get it to a certain level before they do anything with the rates. And it's the same around the world, and it'll be the same in Australia as well. We've constantly seen some let's call them disappointing numbers coming out from Australia, especially around unemployment and inflation, but that's not a very Australian-orientated thing. It's happening over the entire world. So it's going to be very important to look at this data and just see how it goes in the future. Obviously there is no forward-looking at this stage, but there is a statement out every month.
How's the market weighted in terms of the expectation if these rates are going to go lower?
It's depending who you ask, really. I talked to a guy. I got statements from a guy from Capital Economics who was a lot more bearish, and he was saying he expects the interest rate to be down at 1.5% by the end of the year, which is it's really unusual because that's a big drop. But who knows? That's the thing with these sort of things. There could be a huge shock to the market, which means that they have to force that rate down, which means the market has a little bit more flexibility to overcome any shocks that may occur. But I would say, and I haven't surveyed everybody, this is just probably my thinking, is that most people think that about 2% is where it's going to stay and it won't get much lower.
Now, we know that the Kiwi is kind of tied to the Aussie.
Yep.
Where it goes, the Kiwi follows. So really all those thoughts of a couple of months ago of us going to parity now have really faded into the oblivion, haven't they?
Absolutely. It's finished. There was the best chance that we had was the minutes before I think it was the January, February, March meeting. I think it was March or April. I think it was April, yeah, where we were on 99.74 cents. So we were like a whisker away from parity. And it sort of captured the imagination of the entire nation. Everybody was like, got it into their minds. We're beating the Aussies. And it's like there's a lot of implications around parity and having a bigger, having more money or a dollar worth more than the Australians. But at the end, as you said, it didn't quite happen. And that ship has well and truly sailed now, in my opinion, and the people that I've talked to. It's just that their rates... We're moving in this sort of different direction now. We have the Aussie rates are at 2% at the moment. As I said, there's no forward guidance. But with the New Zealand dollar and the New Zealand rates, we've got 3.5 at the moment, which, as I just want to point out, global context is really high. New Zealand context is actually quite low. But, I was talking to somebody from ASB Securities this morning, and he was telling me that we're probably going to be looking to see a lot more distance between the two currencies because, especially of the global dairy auction, we've seen dairy prices that aren't really favorable in this sort of environment. So a rate cut from the RBNZ is looking more likely, and a rate stay the same. It's not very the economic way of saying it, but the rates remaining where they are in Australia. So we're going to see a bit more distance coming through. But absolutely, the parity party is pooped.
Jason Walls with us on NBR Radio.
Join NBR's intelligent business network today. www.nbr.co.nz/subscribe. NBR.
To commodity prices. New Zealand commodity prices fell for a second month in May on continued weakness in dairy products and a decline in prices of meat. The ANZ Commodity Price Index for May declined by 4.7%, following April's 7.4% decline. The index is now about 18% lower than in May 2014. This commodity data comes after dairy product prices fell to the lowest level in almost 6 years in the GDT auction overnight, amid concern about the end of milk quotas in Europe, Russia's trade embargo and sluggish Chinese demand. Fonterra last month lowered its Farmgate milk payout for 2014-15 by 10 cents per kilogram of milk solids to the lowest level in 8 years. In the ANZ series, dairy prices fell 8.2% in May and were down 36% from the same month last year. Skim milk powder dropped 13.2% and whole milk powder fell 10%. ANZ New Zealand agri-economist Con Williams said end-of-season New Zealand supply has been higher than expected after improved autumn conditions, especially in the North Island. He said prices were also hurt by lacklustre China demand and increased competition from European skim milk powder. Meat prices fell 2.9% in the latest month, led by a 5.7% drop in beef prices. Lamb fell 4.2%. The horticulture subgroup gained 1.5% and aluminium rose 0.6%. Forestry prices declined 0.6% on weak prices for logs, while wood, pulp and timber were little changed. Seafood rose 0.2%. The NZD index declined 2.7% and was down 7.9% from a year earlier, reflecting the weaker Kiwi dollar, and is now at the lowest level in more than 2 years. To the dairy sector, Fonterra has opened applications for its farmer suppliers to lock in a guaranteed milk price for a portion of their milk in the coming 2015-16 season in a price range of $4.85 a kilogram of milk solids to $5.25, despite under-description for the last two offers. The upper limit matches the Farmgate milk price forecast for the new season, which Fonterra released last week. There will be two opportunities to secure a GMP on 60 million kilogram per milk solid for the season, with up to 40 million available in June and a further 20 million in December. The way the GMP scheme works, farmers apply to supply some of their estimated milk production across one of a range of 5 prices. Allocations are made based on the lowest price offered first, but all farmers will receive the same guaranteed milk price, which is determined at the highest price at which the total quantity of milk solids in the range is reached. Fonterra originally pitched the GMP scheme as a 2-year pilot in 2013 as a way of giving some farmers more certainty on what they'd get paid for a small portion of their milk supply early in the season, given volatility in milk prices. It also provides the co-op certainty over a slice of its milk costs, which is useful when negotiating with end customers. Fonterra's head of origination, Aaron Atkinson, says the process allows for prioritising allocation if the GMP is oversubscribed. He said in a statement, all accepted applications will receive the same guaranteed milk price. However, it's important to note that depending on the total milk solids offered at each price, some farmers may not get all or any of the volume they offered. Farmers are limited in June to applying to fix between 10 to 75% of their estimated milk production for the coming season. The scheme is no longer regarded as a pilot, but the cooperative will assess each year whether to offer a GMP. The launch of this year's applications follow the latest GDT auction overnight, where the index fell by 4.3%, with the average sale price dropping unexpectedly to US $2,412 tonne. However, the Agri HQ season Farmgate milk price for the 2015-16 season increased 3 cents to $5.63 due to the drop in the value of the New Zealand dollar, offsetting the weak auction results. There's been a mixed reaction from Fonterra's 10,500 suppliers to the GMP scheme, with some viewing it as a risk management tool and others arguing the co-op should maintain one milk price for all. Fonterra Shareholders Council Chairman Ian Brown has said the GMP should stay as only a small proportion of the overall payout, or it would send the wrong signals to farmers and allow inefficiencies to creep in. The scheme is supported by banks, which have said they may encourage some heavily indebted farmers to opt for GMP, but won't force them into doing so. The Reserve Bank said last month that the distribution of the $32 billion in dairy sector debt is heavily skewed to a small number of highly indebted farms, with about half the debt held by just 10% of dairy farms. To the Aussie cash rate, the RBA's decision to keep interest rates on hold yesterday was no surprise to experts, but some are left scratching their heads over the lack of evidence suggesting the RBA is open to further cuts. TD Securities Chief Asian and Pacific Rates Strategist Annette Beecher says despite Australia's OCR remaining unchanged at 2%, it was surprising the RBA didn't give any explicit guidance in terms of any further rate movements. Ms Beecher says that as the RBA laid down the justification for the May cut squarely at the feet of the inflation outlook, the markets could price a material chance of another rate cut to 1.75% after the July 22nd first quarter consumer price index report if it disappoints. However, ASB head of foreign exchange sales Tim Kelleher says there were no surprises from the RBA's announcement yesterday, including the lack of explicit forward guidance. He says in terms of interest rate cuts, Australia is at the bottom of the cycle, and unless the economy takes a major turn for the worse, it's not likely the RBA will be making any further cuts this year. Asked about the lack of any explicit forward guidance from the RBA, Mr Kelleher says this helps to signal the RBA is of the opinion the current 2% rate level is low enough. He said it's given the economy more than enough stimulus combined with the success of the budget. I think it should just sit on things. Added to this is the concern about what Mr Kelleher calls the bubble in Australia's housing market. He says further rate cuts could fuel the bubble and is further evidence of why the RBA will most likely keep its rates at 2%. Following the announcement, the Kiwi dollar dropped by 0.5 cent against the Aussie. Mr Kelleher says there is a more than good chance the gap between the two currencies will continue to widen. He said if New Zealand gets a rate cut in June, which I think we're leaning toward, especially given the dairy auction overnight, then you should see that Kiwi-Aussie cross continue to go lower.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
NBR Radio on Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me now Mark Stockdale from AA Petrol Watch. Talking the announcement from Z Energy yesterday, of course the acquisition of the Caltex chain at the moment. Are there concerns fundamentally now as we digest this announcement about what this is going to mean in terms of competition and one dominant player in the market now with 49% market share? I mean, how concerned are you about the implications that has for motorists?
Well, the AA is a little bit concerned. I mean, we would hope that this will not have a negative impact on competition. There are still going to be two other major retailers in the New Zealand market, or three in the North Island if you include Gull. We hope it won't have a negative impact on competition or on fuel prices, but the concern that the AA has is that if this takeover does go ahead and is approved by the Commerce Commission, it will mean that Z will have basically a 49% share of New Zealand's transport fuel market. And that's quite a lot of market dominance. And certainly what we've seen ever since Z came into being, when it took over Shell's assets a few years ago, is that they have been quite clear in their view that the fuel company margins need to rise, and that's the amount of money that the fuel companies make on every litre of fuel. And Z are often one of the first companies to raise prices, and so they've been pushing those prices up and they've been pushing margins up. And will having a 49% market share mean that gives them more market power to increase those prices and increase margins, or will they be still kept at bay through competition from the likes of BP and Mobil and to a lesser extent Gull?
What interests me is what appears to be a trend here about the major oil companies getting out of smaller markets like New Zealand.
Well, I think that's a really pertinent observation. It's certainly something that the AA has observed, and I think a lot of motorists won't really understand this. They probably think that they're just, when they rock up to a service station, they're buying fuel from a multinational oil company that makes billions of dollars a year, and the reality is we're going to have to change our mindset. That is rapidly no longer becoming the case. In fact, after this announcement, Z is going to be the largest fuel retailer in New Zealand. It is a New Zealand fuel company that's run from New Zealand, and it has no oil interests whatsoever. The big multinational oil companies are getting out of New Zealand, just as they have been getting out of places like Australia and in Europe. And so we've already seen Shell obviously exit the market, and that's how Z came into being. They bought Shell's assets. Mobil actually has put itself on the market a few years ago and had no takers. So it's still around, but it's actually selling off its service stations sort of one by one. Caltex had actually already sold off its service station network, and so Z doesn't actually get to own the Caltex service stations. It's owning the distribution infrastructure and the contracts and some of that stuff, but the Caltex service stations are independently owned. But Caltex, having done that, are now selling off the rest of their New Zealand operations to Z. BP is the only multinational oil company that has said it is still committed to the New Zealand market. So the days of the last 100 years or so where the fuel in New Zealand has been supplied by some overseas oil company, those days are rapidly coming to an end. They obviously don't see value in remaining in New Zealand.
So really, for all intents and purposes, Z Energy is just a marketing brand.
Well, it's a wholesaler. It's got obviously a distribution network. Z does own its own Z service stations, but the Caltex purchase, that's while they'll be supplying the Caltex service stations, those service stations are independently owned. Obviously, Z also does have shares in the New Zealand refinery, Marsden Point. So does Caltex, and Caltex has been selling those shares off, but Z is not picking up those shares. So it's taking on quite a large wholesale and distribution network, and it will obviously, Z will continue to control the prices at Z-owned service stations, but it won't control the prices at the Caltex service stations because those prices are set by the independent owners of those Caltex service stations. But of course, Z will be controlling the wholesale price that it sells the fuel to those service stations at. And so it will have some ability to control prices, but not actually the retail price per se.
And we know that they have a 2-year usage of the Caltex brand. So one assumes that we're going to see a similar situation to the merger between National Bank and ANZ, that eventually it will all eventually become Z Energy.
Well, I think that's obviously a question that you'll need Z to actually answer. But in our conversations with Z and looking at the material that they've publicised, they've made it very clear that they see value for them as a company in keeping Caltex as a separate brand. It is a slightly different type of business. As I mentioned, the service stations are already independently owned. And they see value in having two slightly different operations in the retail market, and that they want to keep them separate. And I think that's probably something good that we can take out of the announcement. They do want to keep it separate. They see value in a separate brand, and that they're, from their point of view, they're two slightly different market offers. And because those service stations are independently owned, the prices are set by those owners independently of Z. And so from the AA's point of view, that means there should still be an element of price competition, and also there will be some product differentiation, market differentiation. They'll position themselves differently in the market in the same way that we do. There's only two dominant supermarket suppliers in New Zealand, but actually there are more than two supermarket brands. There are the sort of the budget supermarkets and the more expensive supermarkets, and there's room for that sort of differentiation in the retail fuel market as well. And when you include the likes of Gold, who actually have a different type of fuel, they have a biofuel. And Z are looking at getting into the biofuel space too. So I think there is space for some differentiation, and that's something that Z seem to be keen to want to continue with.
And just finally, as you've mentioned, with them controlling 49% of the market, that's a serious amount of dominant market position. And we know that Z are on record as having to say that it wants to see margins continuing to rise. So how important do you believe it's going to be that the Commerce Commission watches this whole scenario very closely in the future?
Well, obviously, the takeover does have to be approved by the Commerce Commission, so that's something that they will obviously be investigating, and the Commerce Commission will be talking to a number of interested parties, and the AA obviously is one of those interested parties. We represent motorists, and obviously motorists are a substantial customer of service stations. Not the only customer of fuel companies. In fact, they obviously have big. They also supply a lot of fuel to trucking companies and also to the aeroplane industry. So, but we're an important stakeholder, and so obviously we'll be talking to the Commerce Commission about our views and our concerns, and around whether there is a potential to compromise competition and the sort of concern around the risk that we might see higher prices as a result of this. On the other hand, we've got to look at what's happening in other countries. In Australia, the oil companies have been getting out of Australia, and there are only 2 dominant fuel retailers in Australia versus 4 in New Zealand, and Australia has 5 times the population. So, and in New Zealand we've only got 2 supermarket chains. So there's clearly there have been precedents set where the Commerce Commission has approved these sorts of mergers and potentially the reduction in competition that might come with it.
Mark Stockdale from AA Petrol Watch, thanks for joining us on NBR Radio. Joining me, Chief Executive of Z Energy, Mike Bennetts. Mike, obviously a big 24 hours for the company. How are you feeling about the reaction that you've had to this announcement around Caltex, and how long has this deal been in the works?
Yeah, so this has been in the works since about this time last year, actually. I reached out to all of our 3 major competitors to try to create the case around willing buyer, willing seller. I was heard reasonably well in all 3 cases. By the time we got to the end of the year, it was clear that Chevron were interested in doing something. We had quite a substantial discussion in January. We moved that forward to a non-binding offer in March, and we've obviously concluded that with a sale and purchase agreement earlier this week.
We seem to have a situation where the large oil companies are not particularly interested in New Zealand. We saw, Z Energy emerge from the decision by Shell to depart, and now Caltex wants to get out of the market. Why do you think this is occurring?
I think if I was simply to repeat what they've disclosed to the market at a sort of global level, essentially they say they would prefer to bias their portfolio towards the upstream. That's what they're very good at. There's a lot of risk in that they are best able to deal with. Downstream markets, which is all about refining and marketing, is less attractive to them. It's usually better served through local participants than a global participant. And particularly in a market like New Zealand that is low growth, they would prefer to invest in downstream markets, perhaps like China, Brazil, Russia, India, where they get higher levels of growth and where their global experience is probably better served than in a market like New Zealand that's mature, where we would like to say that the local guys can do a better job.
How will you manage this relationship, given that obviously the Caltex petrol stations are all, in most cases, individually owned? How will you manage a relationship where you aren't actually in control of the end product, as it were?
Yeah, I think we'll manage that with a whole lot of sensitivity. I mean, I'm very tuned into these are independent dealers, often family businesses that go into business for their own good reasons, which is quite different to the franchise or agency model that Z operates under its own brand. So it's going to be a different type of working, if you like, lots more listening and collaboration together, and as you point to, lots more hands-off. I'm very comfortable about that. I think it's a fantastic model that brings great diversity to Z, and ultimately, and again, without wishing to sound too corny, I think it gives consumers, ultimately the buying public, quite a lot of choice. A Z service station feels and looks different to what's currently a Caltex one, and long may that continue.
But one of the successes of Z Energy has been, this culture you've developed, and particularly this focus on service. Will you be looking to embed that Z Energy culture within Caltex as well?
No, not at all. The Z Energy way of doing things, if you like, I think is great. Not everyone in the market loves that, or not anyone in the market, or everyone in the market is attracted to that. I think this is all about segmentation, and I think there are other examples of this working in other parts of New Zealand. So perhaps Pack and Save in New World, ultimately owned by the same company, but they go to market in a different way. They don't confuse the brands and they don't confuse the offers. And different parts of New Zealand are attracted to one or the other.
So what's your sense about how you would define Caltex against what currently exists within Z?
Well, I wouldn't want to define that myself today. I have a sort of a point of view on it, but it's a pretty poorly informed one. I'd be very keen to sit down with the Chevron employees, sit down with the 146 dealers or retailers that they have, and just understand what they think really matters, what really works for them, and to make sure we preserve all of that. And if there's anything that Z's experience can add to that, we'd obviously bring that to the table. But it's a very different model.
Clearly, you plan, at least in the interim, to retain the Caltex branding. Is it your intention that would remain long-term?
It's certainly one of our options, and we've negotiated things such that we have a very clear 2-year period for the use of the Caltex brand, and we have options to use it thereafter. We certainly have the Challenge brand. It's a brand that, if we were to go ahead with this transaction, it's a brand that the new company would own, and there are other alternatives we could put out there as well. The only thing that we're very, very clear on is it will not be Z brand on Caltex sites, and we're not looking to make it the same operating model. 2 brands, 2 different models.
Obviously, the issue that's being focused on at the moment is around the dominance that this will give you. 49% of the market will make you clearly the dominant player. And obviously, people have concerns about that. How do you respond to those concerns?
I think they're totally valid concerns in one respect, in that I can certainly appreciate why people think that way. I think this is one of those times where you sort of have to get into sort of the facts versus the interpretation. From a factual perspective, it's not 49% of the market would be within our control. The Chevron business sells to 90 Challenge branded service stations, and it sells to 146 Caltex branded service stations for their 21% market share. So already, there's a difference there where farmlands buy all of the fuel and put it through the Challenge brands and make their own decision around how that is priced, how that is provided to customers. And you've got 146 independent operators in the Caltex branded network making their own decisions. So I think it's sort of at a gross level, at a national level, what you talked about is absolutely true. When you break it down into markets or products by way of geography, then it looks quite different. So I'll be upfront about this. The combined company would end up with a 100% share of the bitumen market. Now that sounds incredibly scary until I think the fact is shared that the people who buy bitumen in the New Zealand market, and there are only a handful of them, they actually own all of the infrastructure. And their choice is to buy from a domestic manufacturer like ourselves, or Caltex who do it at the moment, or to import from overseas. So in that sense, the market is not about what is produced in New Zealand. The market is what is the choice those customers have, and it's either international or from a local manufacturer.
But you are on record as saying that petrol margins need to rise, and when you have that degree of control that you do, then you can begin to execute on that. Is that part of the strategy as well too?
I think there's 2 points I'd make in response to that. I've certainly said in the past that margins do need to rise to provide adequate returns for the risks that companies like ourselves are taking. Clearly, putting these 2 companies together creates an economy of scale and a level of efficiency that puts us into the right zone around what are reasonable returns for a company like us to take. So that's the first thing, is I wouldn't want anyone to think that we want to go and put margins up to make reasonable returns. In actual fact, completing this transaction puts us into a good zone around that. And then secondly, we are competing at one level with some of the world's biggest companies, so they could choose, if you like, to cross-subsidise or to bring benefit from their global operations into their New Zealand operations. So we've got that at one end of town. And at the other end of town, there's about 10 independent companies that are out there with their own branded service stations competing fiercely every day. There's about 1,250 service stations in New Zealand, and the combined network of the Caltex brand and the Z brand is about 350. So it's only about a 25% share of the number of service stations in the market.
Are you expecting that as a result of this, you will be subject to a higher level of scrutiny?
As strange as it sounds, I don't think we will. And that's, I think, because we are already subject to quite a lot of scrutiny. I mean, New Zealand families and households and businesses look at fuel prices every day. It's a big input for households, and it's clearly a big input for businesses. So there's a lot of scrutiny from eventually the customers. Certainly the government and stakeholders like the AA have things to say about us from time to time, and there's lots of public data from which they can make those comments. I don't think the scrutiny will change at all. The other thing that I'd point out is, we've recently been acknowledged as having the second best corporate reputation in New Zealand. Now, I'm hardly likely to sort of throw that away just to make a few more pennies, given we've worked so hard to ensure we have a decent reputation, because New Zealand is the only market we work in. If we get it wrong here, there is nowhere else to go. And that's quite different to our foreign competitors.
And just finally, what's the big vision here about what this collective entity will be able to deliver in the future, do you believe?
I think if you looked at it through the lens of different stakeholders, that's the place to go. So I'd say from an employee perspective, there's lots more opportunity around career and personal development. If you looked at it from a customer perspective, notwithstanding their concerns around pricing, I think we'll be able to offer really good services, really good prices, and a range of offers that appeal to different segments. If you look at what we do in the broader community, clearly with a larger company, there's a chance for us to do more around corporate social responsibility. So, for example, our investment in biodiesel, we could easily expand that given that we've got a bigger demand pool. And then when it comes to people like the government, for example, I think we can actually be an example of a good corporate citizen in New Zealand. And as I mentioned earlier, clearly reputation matters to us, whether it's with our employees, our shareholders, our customers or the government. We're pretty keen to make sure we retain that position.
Mike Bennett, thanks for joining us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
In People News, 2 senior executives are to leave the investment banking team of big local broking firm First New Zealand Capital. Carl Blanchard and Martin Stern, both managing directors of investment banking at First New Zealand, confirmed their departure this week. Mr. Blanchard is to join institutional investor ACC as head of direct investment in a couple of months. He says, "It's a great move. I'm really looking forward to it." Mr. Stern could not immediately be reached for comment. As the two prepare to move on, the gap will be partially filled by Brent Patterson, who's joining First New Zealand next week from Forsyth Barr, where he was a director of investment banking. First New Zealand Capital is currently working as a joint lead manager for a proposed initial public offer of Carter Holt Harvey. In politics, Labour has attacked the appointment of former Conservation Minister Kate Wilkinson as an Environment Court Commissioner. Labour's Shadow Attorney General David Parker says it's wrong in principle. He says it flies in the face of the accepted doctrine of separation of powers. This requires judicial processes to remain separate and independent from the legislature. Mr. Parker says citizens need confidence the law will be and be seen to be applied impartially. He says Kate Wilkinson left Parliament less than a year ago. While it's theoretically possible for someone to leave politics and pursue another career that leads to a judicial role, this appointment comes far too soon for there to be clear air between the two roles. He says this appointment undermines the separation of powers and undermines the reputation of our independent judiciary. This is all the more so when Ms Wilkinson was a minister in the ruling government last term. Mr Parker says Ms Wilkinson advocated for greater commercial use of the conservation estate, as was her right, and oversaw the decline of advocacy functions of the Department of Conservation. Mr Parker says she was also part of a government that criticised environmental protections under the Resource Management Act. He says she will be hearing cases where the Crown is a party. Those cases will also be considering changes to the Resource Management Act her government made. Mr Parker says, while I accept Ms Wilkinson as a person of integrity, this appointment is wrong in principle. Attorney General Christopher Finlayson last week announced the appointment of Christchurch-based Ms Wilkinson and reappointed Catherine Edmonds of Wellington as Commissioners of the Environment Court, both for a 5-year term. Ms Wilkinson was a lawyer for 26 years before entering Parliament in 2005. As a lawyer, she was involved in property, commercial and corporate areas of law. She was Minister of Conservation from 2009 to 13. The Environment Court consists of 9 judges, 9 alternate judges, 12 commissioners and 5 deputy commissioners. It's a specialist court, often dealing with property and planning matters. Appeals from the Environment Court can be made on points of law to the High Court. Environment Court judges may sit alone to hear some kinds of cases, but for appeals about plans and resource consents, the court is usually comprised of 1 judge and 2 commissioners. It may also be comprised of 1 judge and 1 commissioner, or in major cases, 1 judge and 3 commissioners.
NBR Radio on Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson, and joining me, Hamish McNichol. Hamish, you've been following developments with Global Mode. It seems that the court case won't actually be heard for, about 9 months?
Yeah, so this has obviously been bandied around for a while, this whole issue of Global Mode and the big media companies wanting to take on the ISPs over it. But we've never really known when the trial was likely to actually be heard. And then today I was talking to the lawyer for the ISPs, Rick Shearer, and he's told me that the trial date has been pushed back to the first available 4 weeks after Easter next year, so nearly 10 months away, which is interesting because the media companies had earlier won a hearing, I think it was in April, where they basically asked for a quick hearing on the case, and this is about as quick as they're going to get.
So do you think that is going to impress them, having to wait that long?
Yeah, not sure. I mean, it is a 4-week set for the High Court, which is quite a long time and quite hard to book out that sort of hearing, I suppose. So I guess it's not too far away, but sort of it's just interesting that, last month they were welcoming the fact that they were awarded a quick hearing, and then as it stands, I think back then that they were under the impression that it could maybe be heard as early as December this year and at the latest April. And now, of course, with it being after Easter next year, Easter's March 27, it's going to be April at the absolute earliest. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they want to get this out in court, and that's going to be as quick as they can, but certainly it doesn't seem that fast to us.
So that means that the status quo remains?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a couple. My Republic, which is a Singapore-owned ISP, recently pulled the pin on its own global mode equivalent fibre TV. So a couple are folding under the pressure or just the sheer flexing of muscles from these big media companies, but the others are standing tall and fighting it, and believe statements of defence will be filed a bit later this month. So we already know what the media companies are saying, but it'll be interesting to see what the defence is.
And will this be something of a precedent case globally around this issue?
I'm not entirely sure. To be fair, I think the reason why it exists here is because we don't have access to this offshore content, and so that's spawned these sorts of services, whereas I mean, it's never going to happen in the States probably because it's all legal there, it's all paid for, whereas here we're accessing their services for what the media companies say is illegally. And
a good opportunity for the lawyers because they love these sorts of cases when there's big budgets attached to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine TVNZ, MediaWorks, Sky TV and Spark aren't sparing any expense.
Hamish McNichol with us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant, an unparalleled private dining room choice. NBR. NBR Radio.
To new lending laws. New lending laws that will come into force on Saturday mean lenders must carry out better background checks to make sure the borrower can meet repayments. Lender responsibility principles are being introduced from June 6 with changes to the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act 2003, which applies to all lenders who provide consumer credit, take security over consumer goods or enter into buyback transactions. This includes banks, car dealers, pawnbrokers and payday lenders. Lenders must make reasonable inquiries before entering into a loan or taking a guarantee that the borrower or guarantor will be able to make repayments or comply with the guarantee without suffering substantial hardship. The changes mean lenders must publicly display their interest rates and standard form contract terms. The stricter rules are governed by the Commerce Commission, which has been making a concerted effort over recent years to crack down on loan sharks. Commissioner Anna Rawlings says in a statement the new rules will give consumers more protection and better information when borrowing money and require all lenders to act responsibly. She says this is particularly important for vulnerable borrowers. Lenders must ensure loan documents are clear, concise and intelligible so that borrowers can understand them and make informed decisions. Borrowers will also need to be prepared for more thorough questions and provide evidence to ensure the loan is suited to them. The Commission is currently prosecuting a South Auckland payday lender allegedly targeting vulnerable consumers. 2050 Club and its sole director, Gavin John Marsich, have been accused of falsely claiming to be a registered financial services provider and member of the Financial Services Complaints Dispute Resolution Scheme, charging unreasonable default and establishment fees and illegally repossessing a debtor's vehicle. Mr. Marsich is also facing separate criminal charges for allegedly threatening a debtor with a meat cleaver. It's not known if Mr. Marsich entered a plea with the trial due this month. Repossession laws have also been updated, with lenders no longer allowed to take security over essential goods such as beds and fridges. If repossession agents are not licensed, they can be fined up to $200,000 and their company up to $600,000. To court news, Kim.com has successfully stalled the Crown from taking over millions of dollars worth of assets despite a US federal district court forfeiture ruling. In April, a High Court judge ruled Kim.com could get some frozen bonds back for living expenses and legal costs. But a US federal district court forfeiture ruling meant that money, plus millions of dollars worth of assets, including a house and luxury cars, could be taken over by the Crown. The legal process for foreign forfeiture orders is that the Crown must register them before they come into force. But Mr. .com's lawyers last month argued for a judicial review of Deputy Solicitor General Brendan Horsley's decision to do so. At issue was who should have made the decision, which was assigned by Attorney General Chris Finlayson to the Deputy Solicitor General. Crown lawyer David Bolt, in turn, applied to strike out the application before Justice Rebecca Ellis in the High Court at Auckland. But today, Justice Ellis has declined the strikeout applications, granting Mr. .com and co-defendant Bram van der Kolk interim relief. Justice Ellis's judgment says the plaintiffs have a substantial position to preserve and there will be very real consequences if it is not protected, pending final determination of the claim for review. Authorising the registration application to proceed now might deprive the plaintiffs of any ability to defend the extradition or to pursue their appeals against the forfeiture order in the United States. Justice Ellis also ruled the Commissioner of Police can take no further action on the foreign forfeiture orders made in the US until further order of the High Court in New Zealand. The US has forfeiture orders over about $4 million in bonds, which have been released to Mr. .com, as well as about 20 to 30 luxury motor vehicles, plus Mona.com's home, which is next door to the .com mansion. That house is worth between $4 to $5 million, the High Court at Auckland heard. Justice Sarah Katz last month ruled Mr. .com and his co-accused, also including Matthias Ortmann, will face an extradition hearing at a date no earlier than September 1 this year. To state housing, Social Housing Minister Paula Bennett doesn't expect to complete any state house sales to community providers until next year and says they won't be sold at book value, which he calls an accountancy fallacy. The government planned to sell between 1,000 and 2,000 state houses this year and as many as 8,000 over 3 years to registered community housing providers as part of plans to overhaul Housing New Zealand's stock of 65,000 homes it says aren't suited to the needs of tenants. Ms Bennett told Parliament's Social Services Committee that the sales probably weren't going to happen this year, with potential iwi buyers playing hardball in their opening negotiations. She said, as far as the expressions of interest and market research that we're doing, I would be surprised if we sold them by the end of this year, though I think we'd be getting pretty close. What iwi leaders have said is they've come into a negotiation and they've tried to start at zero. Well, I don't blame them. Everyone would like a house for nothing, and they've started there, and I suppose that's what negotiations are all about. The government chose Tauranga and Invercargill to embark on the sale of its state houses, where it sees stable demand for social housing and expects active providers to engage. Te Runanga o Te Rarawa chairman Hame Piripi launched an opening gambit on the weekend, claiming the market price for social housing was zero and that the government should transfer them at no cost. Ms Bennett said it wasn't the government's intention to give away houses, though she wouldn't rule out the inclusion of housing stock in a treaty of Waitangi settlement as a possibility. She declined to speculate on what kind of discount to the book value the houses would be sold at, saying the Crown was still in negotiations. Ms Bennett said, I don't see us selling the houses at book value. The book value is, in many respects, an accountancy fallacy and not the reality of what we will get for them on the market. It doesn't actually take into consideration the tenants and that any purchase of those homes would have the tenants and what it means to actually run social houses alongside of them, and that does bring down the cost of them. The government's focus on overhauling Housing New Zealand stock is part of a wider push to reduce the government's monopoly on social services, which Finance Minister Bill English told the Maxim Institute in Wellington yesterday was failing to meet the needs of society's most vulnerable. Mr English identified the way government agencies defend their funding, slowing down decisions on which entity should be a point of contact, and in the way they retain and restrict information relating to their portfolios as barriers to improving the delivery of services.
You're listening to NBR Radio. Upgrade to My NBR Radio with a smartphone-only subscription to NBR Online today for free and receive unlimited access to NBR Online on your smartphone until August 31st. Visit www.nbr.co.nz/free.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson. Welcome to Foreign Affairs Scope, and with me, Nathan Smith. Let's start off with developments in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East.
Yeah, sure. So last week was the second of a number of suicide bombings in Shiite regions in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. That's raising some alarm bells, especially for those watching this, because Saudi Arabia is a fairly tenuous country at most times, and the central threat in that region at the moment is not necessarily ethnic, it's probably Sunni Shia. Shiites are the majority in Iran, whereas the Sunnis are the majority in most of the Arab world. So you can immediately see the split there in the dynamics. And the Islamic State claimed responsibility for both suicide bombs at mosques in that eastern province. They were small. They appear to be grassroots rather than controlled from the centre of Islamic State region at the moment. So it's up in the air as to whether or not they will evolve. But it does raise some concerns for keeping Saudi Arabia untouched by this particular combat, and whether or not they can maintain some sort of peace with the Sunnis and Shias in that region, because there is a tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia as well. And then elsewhere, the Islamic State have made some rapid gains in Syria, especially in the central Homs district with the city of Palmyra. But that has been considered by some experts I was talking to recently not to be such an advance that they are game changing in that region. In fact, there is some suggestion that they may be spreading themselves too thin.
All right, let's move to Italy. Changes in political power, and in fact, a new powerful politician coming to the fore.
Yeah, that's right. Matteo Renzi has retained position, although he's lost a little bit of his power base because of the way voting works. Obviously, his opposition gained some strength, but he still maintains control over the Italian political system there. Low voter turnout this time, which most people are a little bit surprised about, but that is a way of showing your discontent to the current political system as well. So no action is an action. And ultimately, on the other side of this, Eurosceptic parties are still quite strong in Italy, especially considering that they're working through their own measures of austerity and trying to pay back Brussels and try to stay within the Eurozone. But at the moment, Renzi is still strong, but the main challenges won't be necessarily from the opposition, although they are stronger. There seems to be some issues inside his own party, which in the years ahead will cause him more problems.
All right. Yes, always a colourful part of the world when it comes to politics. Moving to the Ukraine, and of course this is a situation that continues to be very much in the headlines at the moment, and no change really in Russia's attitude towards its current stance.
Not at all. The takeaway in the past week or so is the appointment of ex-Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili to the governor of Odessa. Odessa is down in the south of Ukraine. It's been quite central in the ongoing separatist conflict with separatists, I guess you could say, militants in the eastern parts of Ukraine. But it has also seen some terrorist attacks, and it connects Ukraine with the Black Sea. It's their major commercial port. His job is going to be cut out for him because a lot of people will be looking as to how Odessa deals with the separatism. But the other interesting thing is that he's not Ukrainian, but he's not necessarily the first non-Ukrainian to make a governor or a political role. There was an American and a Lithuanian recently. But he is Georgian. So it's interesting that his appointment comes at this particular tenuous time, but it does point in some ways to the seriousness of reform in Ukraine, wishing to become more Western and remove itself from the orbit of post-Soviet Russia. And at the same time, Ukraine is negotiating with the IMF to avoid default. It wants another $2 million of the potential $17.5 billion, $2 billion of the potential $17.5 billion promised to it after 4 years. And during those negotiations, they will probably reach an agreement.
All right, let's talk finally about the US. The Patriot Act, supposedly due for expiration. You almost thought that was an embedded part of US, political psyche these days. Yeah,
and it has been. This is the most significant intelligence reform in over a decade. The Patriot Act came around to increase the powers of the intelligence agencies in the United States and post 9/11 world. It has been incredibly effective for lifting up those powers, but there has been some controversies, especially post Edward Snowden's leaks about the NSA's capturing of potential US metadata and digital communications. Pieces of the Act are still in place, so-called grandfather clauses. Anything in current operation will run through after the Patriot Act expires, and the Freedom Act is a potential replacement which will limit some of the powers that the NSA and the other intelligence agencies had, but still maintain the powers that the intelligence community needs to do its job. But to me, this reflects a changing mindset in the United States, that they're moving away from the memories of 9/11 and the dangers in the years immediately preceding that, to a new reality of perhaps being more comfortable with the idea that terrorism will simply always be a part of modern day life, and they need to start rebalancing the security and privacy bar back down to a more favourable civilian level.
So this is taking it off, the red alert, a bit more down towards amber, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's going to be the new normal, I think. Some experts are saying that, the removal of the Patriot Act now at a time when domestic terrorism in the United States, for instance, in Little Rock and in Garland, Texas, and in other places, has never been more pronounced, is perhaps not a good way to deal with that problem. And of course, you've got the Islamic State, which isn't a transnational terrorism group, but could evolve into one. However, the intelligence agencies have a lot of powers and a lot of capabilities, and this isn't going to completely destroy them.
You'd have to be concerned at the news, I think, of the last 48 hours where the airport security checks were found to be almost non-effective. I think of 60 attempts in a controlled experiment to pass items through, 57 of them managed to get through. So you actually wonder how effective a lot of these security systems have been in reality, when in the sense they've created, a sense where people have felt more comfortable, but how effective they've been perhaps has been another question.
It's that mindset that's key. Grassroots attackers are very dangerous, but then on the other hand, grassroots defenders can be extraordinarily useful as well. It's not all about the law enforcement or the intelligence agencies, and the more people feel like they are comfortable living in the society that they are in, the more normal life keeps going, and therefore, as George W. Bush liked to say, the terrorists don't win. And that's the security theatre around the last 10 or 15 years. We come out full guns blazing when anything bad happens, we're going to be there, was to reinforce that sense of control that people needed to feel in order to carry on their daily lives. And the airports are really good examples of that. They're not necessarily there to protect against all events, but they're there to give you the feeling that going on this aircraft will actually get you to that destination.
As much as anything, it's a mind game.
Correct, yes.
Thanks for joining us. Nathan Smith with us on NBR Radio.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.
I'm Grant Walker with Last Call. Here's what's trending on NBR Online. Commodity prices drop again. New vehicle sales decline. UDC has a record first-half profit. Fonterra offers up its guaranteed milk price for the new season. Manuka Health mulls capital raising. IRD's transformation is continuing and apparently it can't fail. And global mode hearing is pushed out. To find out more, log on to nbr.co.nz or stay tuned. Those stories coming up next on NBR Radio. Let's talk awards. 4 New Zealand companies have bagged top spots at a Trans-Tasman Employer Awards ceremony, with Chorus taking home the gold medal. Chorus is the first New Zealand company to be awarded first place in the Aon Hewitt Best of the Best Employer Awards, beating 10 other companies from New Zealand and Australia. The Best Employer Award includes an employee opinion survey, a people practice inventory, and an organisational audit. Organisations have to meet the criteria for 3 stages to be accredited for the year. In total, almost 150 companies and more than 92,000 employees were involved in the process. To be able to qualify for a top spot, a company has to consistently demonstrate excellence in employee engagement, leadership effectiveness, and a high-performance culture. As well as Chorus nabbing the top spot, other New Zealand-based companies also fared particularly well. Z Energy, Frucor Beverages New Zealand, Microsoft New Zealand, and FedEx Express New Zealand were all also recognised as some of the best companies to work for in 2015. Aon Hewitt's New Zealand Performance Reward and Talent Lead, Jocelyn Anzo, says the winning New Zealand companies were the companies of choice for talented professionals in New Zealand. She said to have 5 New Zealand companies achieve an Aon Hewitt Best Practice accreditation as a best employer is exceptional. To have Chorus win the Best of the Best title for the ANZ region is an absolute coup. In business news, the first company to run a successful equity crowdfunding campaign in New Zealand has beaten its prospectus forecasts. Last August, Blenheim-based Renaissance Brewing raised $700,000, the maximum it sought, and 12.28% of the company from investors in just a week and a half using the Snowball Effect platform. The boutique beer maker said it would invest in new equipment and marketing efforts to help cement its place at the high end of the New Zealand craft beer market and fund exploratory export sales and marketing. Renaissance released its annual results to shareholders. The report is not public, but NBR Radio has seen a copy, which shows earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation of $225,000 for the year to March 31st, 2015, above the forecasted $204,000. It made after-tax profit of $82,000 on revenues of $1.835 million, above the forecasted $1.8 million, with a gross margin of 42%. Revenue was up about 20% on the previous financial year and up 40% October to March on the same period the year before. Its actual net operating surplus was $143,000, coming in below its budgeted amount of $144,000. Last August, Renaissance had a 4-year $362,460 loan from ANZ Bank, which is being repaid from operating cash flows and matures in November 2018, and $230,000 in working capital facilities. The ANZ loan has been paid down as scheduled, with $309,118 now on the balance sheet. Renaissance Development Manager Roger Kerrison told NBR there is still $280,000 left from the $700,000 capital raised. He said, "We are still in the process of investing the crowdfunding money. All the big capital projects were undertaken as outlined, and the remainder will now be used for work in progress and marketing activities." During the year, the company, which picked up a handful of awards, launched in Japan, Finland, Switzerland and Quebec, and now sells in 10 countries. In the coming year, the company is focusing efforts in the UK, along with the New Zealand Craft Beer Collective, and Japan, the Nordic countries, the US and Australia. Mr. Kerrison says forecasted revenue growth is 25% and forecasted EBITDA growth is 77%, both of which we're confident we will surpass this year if we take all the opportunities available to us in export markets. Renaissance founder and chief executive Brian Teal says he expects to exceed the projections given to investors over the next 2 years while improving gross margins. He said it is sustainable and, more importantly, achievable growth for us. Maintaining margins while increasing revenues and profit are very important, as we want to be a high-end luxury brand, not a commoditized volume product. The company is not paying a dividend as forecasted and took on an assistant brewer, operations manager and a key accounts sales manager.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me now, Primary Industries reporter Jamie Ball. Jamie, developments involving Murray McCully over the last few days. Just background the detail, or some of the detail.
Yeah, well, we've put it to the Minister that he was aware that the alleged lawsuit that was threatened by the Saudi businessman, Mr. Al Khalif, was actually dropped 12 months before Mr. McCully stated that claim in the Cabinet paper, a Cabinet paper dated February 2013. We understand any threat of legal action was dropped in February 2012. We've put it in very black and white terms to the Minister, and he's refused to deny that.
Okay, so where does this leave Murray McCully?
Not in a good place. His unwillingness to discuss this or effectively answer many of our questions, such as when I interviewed him late last week, doesn't augur very well for the Minister. If it is the case, which it looks extremely likely, that the legal threat was dropped 12 months beforehand, it opens up the possibility that the Cabinet paper might have misled fellow ministers about the legal threat. In addition, he raised the same claims again twice in Parliament from memory on Wednesday and on Thursday, hanging over the head of this 11.5 million New Zealand demonstration farm in Saudi Arabia, coining it as such as a trade-off or a compromise compared to a 20 to 30 million compensation payoff. Now, if that is not the case and the threat was removed from the table a year before the Cabinet paper, it's arguable, and no doubt some opposition MPs will be throwing their hat into the ring on this, it's arguable that he's misled Parliament as well. Also, the refusal to release any cause of action of the alleged lawsuit is also very suspicious. Or any discussion on what were the grounds for any such lawsuit, because from legal commentators I've spoken with, and I hope to be interviewing more in the coming week to get this up on NBR Online, it would be highly unusual, if not unprecedented, to try and sue a government for introducing a law, a sovereign government like New Zealand and a foreign businessman, in this case from Saudi Arabia. It would be, as far as I'm aware, unprecedented. So to effectively jump on the base of any such lawsuit without even having seen the cause of action seems quite unusual, to say the least.
So obviously the facts of this story are just starting to emerge, but where to from here, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're going to investigate further into this matter. Who were the people who actually negotiated this deal, and what were their agendas? What we do know is everything. What we do know is the government has not been transparent about this. Even yesterday in Parliament, the Prime Minister was asked questions again. For example, for Winston Peters asking, will the Prime Minister make available to this Parliament and the public all the legal advice and opinion that Cabinet received behind this deal? And the answer was no, as is consistent with the way legal advice is always treated. Now, to answer your question more accurately, where did that legal advice come from? Certainly not from any external sources, as far as we can work out, and that's where we're going to take this from here. And also, who are the people negotiating this deal on behalf of the Minister and MFAT and even NZTE?
Jamie Ball, Primary Industries reporter, with us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. With the Property Press. It's out now to show you around.
In People News, 3 new members have been appointed to the board of the Financial Markets Authority, which regulates capital markets and financial services in New Zealand. Campbell Stewart, William Stevens and Mark Todd will join the FMA for terms of 3 to 5 years, starting June 8, Commerce Minister Paul Goldsmith said in a statement. Mr Stewart is a registered chartered accountant with 25 years' experience in stockbroking and funds management. He's a director of Aspiring Asset Management and was previously managing principal at UBS New Zealand. He was on the NZX Disciplinary Committee for 9 years and was vice chairman of the NZX prior to corporatisation. Mr Stevens has nearly 30 years' experience in the stockbroking and investment advisory industry. He's been a director and investment advisor for Craig's Investment Partners since 2001 and was previously a director at Merrill Lynch and a lieutenant commander in the Royal New Zealand Navy. For 9 years, he was deputy chairman of the New Zealand Markets Disciplinary Tribunal. Mr Todd is an independent barrister and solicitor with over 20 years' experience in funds management, financial services and insurance regulation. He is a director and co-founder of Anti-Money Laundering Solutions and a member of the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. He was a partner at Bell Gully for 15 years and advised on the new financial markets legislation. Mr Todd has been a member of Bell Gully's board, is a former director of 3 related NZSX-listed companies and is a director of Westpac Life. Michael Webb was reappointed to the FMA board for a further year, while James Miller and Justine Smythe have stepped down after 4 years. Mr Webb is a commercial barrister specialising in financial markets, banking, insolvency, government and corporate law. He's been a member of the FMA board since May 2011 and was chairman of the Ministerial Task Force on the Regulation of Financial Intermediaries. He was provisionally a non-executive member and a regularly acting chairman of the former Securities Commission. He's also a director in both the private and public sectors. Let's talk Inland Revenue. The Office of the Auditor-General says Inland Revenue's $1 billion plus project to update its ageing information technology system is too important to fail. And while the initial governance structures put in place seem appropriate, it's too early to say whether value for money is being achieved. Performance Audit Manager David Press at the Office of the Auditor-General told Parliament's Finance and Expenditure Committee the project is vital to Inland Revenue, though it's too early in the design stage to assess whether it's achieving value for money. The Auditor-General investigated the governance of the project, finding it provided clear direction and supported decision-making, but that the tax department has to carefully manage the risks associated with the program. He says ultimately this is a program that cannot fail because there is so much dependent on it. A key building block of effective programs is good governance. The Tax Department's business transformation project to replace its 30-year-old first IT system aims to protect the agency's ability to collect Crown revenue while allowing it to deal with a raft of new responsibilities tacked on to the network over the past 15 years, such as overseeing KiwiSaver payments, student loans and welfare entitlements. Initial scoping on the project estimates it will cost between 1.3 and 1.9 billion over 8 to 10 years, a bill that has attracted criticism from the likes of Xero's Rod Drury. The IRD currently spends about 100 million maintaining the current first system. Mr. Press said previous examples of major IT projects stressed the importance of good governance, and the Office of the Auditor General will be looking at what benefits are being achieved in future work. The Cabinet has signed off on 193 million of spending on the project, which is currently in the design phase. The project will be staggered, and the department will have to get government sign-off on each new phase of spending. The Tax Department is currently working on a new estimate for the program, and Greg James, Deputy Commissioner Change at IRD, told the committee he expected the cost will likely be at the lower end of the 1.3 to 1.9 billion range and will be delivered in 8 years. Mr. James said that the core system of record will be one of 9 available off-the-shelf commercial products, but that the Tax Department is looking at adopting open source options and end-user mobile elements. In business news, Manuka Health, the functional food and dietary supplement company, is reviewing capital-raising options to help fund a global rollout of new products sent to boost the antibacterial qualities of Manuka honey and its pipeline of research and development. The private company has ruled out a public listing at this stage, but Chief Executive Kerry Paul said it was considering other options, including new investors who bring more than just capital to the table. Manuka Health was founded in 2006 and exports 90-plus products based on propolis, royal jelly, bee pollen and Manuka honey to 45 countries. It has annual turnover of more than 50 million, 80 staff, and is owned by a number of private shareholders, including Mr. Paul and family interests associated with Chairman Ray Thompson and institutional investors Milford Asset Management and Waterman Capital. Manuka Health holds a worldwide license and pays royalties on sales to Kobe University of Medicine in Japan for the new technology, which combines encapsulated Manuka honey with plant-derived cyclodextrin, creating a free-flowing powder that can easily be added to foods and beverages for ease of delivery of health benefits, according to a report on the company's website. The combination boosts the antibacterial properties of the Manuka honey by between 25 and 50 times, depending on the product. Manuka Health's products brand the technology as CycloPower. Products using the technology are being rolled out worldwide, including capsules that support digestive health, chewable tablets for mouth and throat health, and a skincare range for problem skin. The supplements can't legally have therapeutic claims made about them. Mr. Paul said the company is funding a human clinical trial in New Zealand on the digestive tablets that, if successful on completion early next year, would allow the company to register them to be sold with claimed health benefits. Mr. Paul said it gives the medical community more confidence in the product, and we'd like to see these products used as complements to what else they're prescribing. We're not looking to replace traditional drug therapies. Mr. Thompson said the company was trading very strongly and didn't have to raise funds to complete the global rollout of CycloPower. However, international expansion was expensive, and the company had just funded a new $10 million purpose-built honey processing and distribution centre in Tawamutu last year, which enabled it to triple production. So we're evaluating a number of options in front of us, he said. Mr. Paul said the rollout of the CycloPower technology platform marked a turning point for the company. He said this is going to take us to a whole new level. My aim is to evolve this company from functional foods and supplements into a global natural healthcare company. Along with the CycloPower technology, the company launched wound care products last year, sold through medical and pharmacy channels, a new skincare range this year, and has a number of other potential products in its R&D pipeline.
NBR
Radio.
Free to air online. NBR, the meeting place of intelligent business.
This is NBR Radio. I'm Jason Walls, and I'm joined by reporter Nathan Smith, and we're talking about the recent revelations regarding FIFA and the outgoing president. So let's just be real broad here. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Immediately, this sort of strikes me as a little bit of scapegoating. I was watching some footage of him being carted away, so to speak, or resigning yesterday. and just thinking, hang on, something's not quite right here. It seems to be too simple, too quick, and people are sort of putting a Band-Aid on this and just putting it aside. Even now, still a lot of people are talking about, the corruption goes deeper than just this man, and there's hundreds of people working for FIFA, and they all need to be looked at. But to me, the real question we need to be asking, I think, is how much input does the public have, especially the football watching public, how much do they contribute to the actual corruption and the way this all goes in the first place? Because there's a lot of money involved here. Advertisers are involved, which means they can make money somehow. Countries around the world scramble over each other to sort of fund these massive projects, which none of them can afford, and usually are incredibly detrimental for them afterwards. Your Qatar, your Brazil.
Yeah, you were telling me that, you were saying before that there's been a projected of 4,000 people that are going to die, and they've only been paid like $50 a day.
Yeah.
A week, sorry.
For a week, yeah. And for 260-something, I believe, $1 billion infrastructure they're building in Qatar. By the way, that's just not the stadiums only. That's the hotels, and that's the roads, and that's the logistics and all that sort of stuff. So it's all ground up. But there's a lot of money going into this. And, I mean, for sporting events, and I don't necessarily watch sporting events all the time, so maybe I'm not the best person to sort of critique this, but behind this there does seem to be if it's only Sepp Blatter, then that's okay. If it's only FIFA upper echelons, then that's fine. Let's just get back to watching football here. But it goes a lot deeper, because the corruption is endemic all the way through the sport, and I don't want to point the finger and say maybe if you watch it then you're culpable. But the contradiction is there. We put this stuff aside and we say, cool, he's resigned, the problem is over, but it's not over, and this will just keep going until the culture can change around what sport is and what this money does to people.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just cutting the head off the snake. The problem sort of, as you were saying, systemic for the whole organization.
Yeah, and it runs all the way down to the individual watching as well. They can sort of put aside, as someone would with their Nike shoes, that a Chinese worker is potentially 4 years old or 5 years old putting together laces or a shoe, but that's somehow okay, or sort of put out of their minds when they buy the shoe. It's kind of the same with football. As 4,000 people are projected to die, as you've rightly pointed out, in Qatar. But we just go back to watching football as if it didn't happen. Now, I'm comfortable with that contradiction. We all live with contradictions, but the intriguing thing to me is that this appears in the press and with the football fans to be FIFA's problem. This is your problem as a fan, as a person, and this is always going to be there, because essentially this is your identity. People wrap their identities up in being football players or supporting a team, and
it's huge, isn't it? It's around the world. I mean, I spent some time in Africa when I was younger, and it's basically what unites people and it divides people as well. I mean, especially I lived in England as well, and we lived in the Northeast, and it wasn't more about who you supported, it was about who you hated, and it was just this huge ideology built around football and just everything. You live, breathe, everything about it is just, as you're saying, people just wrap themselves around it. I think one of the things that I've been most interested in around this whole scenario is that beforehand, when he was asked, "Are you going to resign?" he was quoted as saying, "If I resign, it kind of portrays this idea that I've done something wrong, and I haven't." And then only a week or so after he's been saying these things, off he walks, and it's only 4 days after he was actually elected. I mean, so what's going on here? I mean, you used the word suspicious to describe this in your article.
Oh, well, I use that in regards to the fact that the American FBI is leading the investigation here. I mean, as everyone knows, I mean, even I peripherally know that America is not shall we say, a superpower in world football. So for them to come out and go so intensely on this particular investigation, suggests other politics behind this. Maybe they're considered neutral. I doubt it. But and the FBI have a lot of firepower behind that. But that also suggests that maybe the centre of gravity for world football may be changing as well. But that particular instance, not necessarily that there was a conspiracy behind him, pushing him to fall over or anything. But the fact that the American FBI is leading this investigation, to me, just seems like we need to ask a few more questions about where that comes from.
Absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to watch, and I'm sure there's absolutely more to come. Thank you very much for that, Nathan.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
In business news, Vector, the Auckland Gas and Electricity Distribution Company, has hired Goldman Sachs to review its gas lines business after an unnamed party expressed interest in buying its gas transmission businesses. The company hired the investment bank to assess the strategic options for those businesses after they attracted unsolicited interest in recent months, Vector said in a statement. While that's underway, the company will continue to plan on the basis of its existing portfolio. It said, while the board and management of Vector believe these are highly attractive assets, we constantly review our portfolio and will always consider offers that maximise value for our shareholders. Vector's gas business has almost 162,000 customers and operates a transmission system spanning 2,286 kilometres, generating revenue of $96.1 million in the 6 months ended December 31st for a profit of $57.5 million. Last year, the company bought Meridian Energy's ARC Innovations electricity meters, and Vector has been expanding into providing telecommunications transmission as it seeks to diversify earnings away from its regulated electricity lines business. Vector shares last traded at $3.15 and have gained 13% this year. The stock is rated an average hold based on 6 analyst recommendations compiled by Reuters with a target price of $3.15. In council news, Auckland Council's performance has been hammered by public and private infrastructure industry leaders taking part in a sentiment survey. Leaders in the 200 million to 1 billion plus infrastructure markets were surveyed about the city's performance in a number of areas by global professional services firm AECOM as part of its 6-monthly sentiment survey. A number of leaders say the council must reduce bureaucracy and adopt a more streamlined approach to its workflow. One leader says Auckland Council requires a much leaner structure, no duplication of roles, clear governance and a strategic direction. Nearly 40% of the leaders rate the city's performance below average to poor in all but one area. Half of the leaders say the city's financial management, after a period of debate and scrutiny, has worsened to below average and poor since the previous survey 6 months ago. A series of factors, including revaluations and a transport levy, mean many households are facing rate rises of more than 20%. The average rate rise is 9.9%, which has even angered some of the more right-wing councillors. AECOM says there has been little improvement of the rating in the area. It's not all bad for the council. More than a quarter of the leaders view city planning, community and engagement and infrastructure development as above average, a reflection, they say, of the city's commitment to solving transport and congestion. Despite a ticking off from the Auditor General for the council over the Building Control Department's communication and interaction with clients, 65% of leaders in AECOM's survey think approval processes have improved at the council. AECOM New Zealand Managing Director John Bridgman says despite this, comments reflected a perceived lack of consistency which could be delaying further progress in making changes. In business news, the Reserve Bank has called for expressions of interest to buy its New Zealand Clear security settlement and depository business after a strategic review deemed it was not a core business for the bank and required significant investment. The central bank said it has also investigated replacement systems in the event it's unable to find a suitable alternative provider. A sale would be the end of a 25-year era for the Reserve Bank and operating NZ Clear, having migrated to an electronic system from the old manual system. Deputy Governor and Head of Operations Jeff Bissan said in a statement, the Reserve Bank is keen to see if another specialist operator can provide security settlement and depository services that meet both the bank's requirements and those that the market has become accustomed to. The NZ Clear system, the technology behind a key piece of New Zealand's financial infrastructure, requires significant investment or replacement. He said while the bank had a preference to see a new provider of NZ Clear services, there were a range of systems available that would potentially meet the bank's requirements if a new operator wasn't forthcoming. Mr. Bissan said New Zealand Clear members are important stakeholders, so we intend to provide regular briefings as this process evolves. Expressions of interest must be filed by June 23 using documentation available through the Government Electronic Tenders Service.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett. Open for breakfast, lunch and dinner and everything in between. NBR Radio.
To the courts, a Ross Asset Management investor who was able to withdraw $945,000 from RAM's Ponzi-style scheme before it collapsed is fighting to keep name suppression ahead of a High Court decision on whether liquidators can claw back funds for unpaid investors. Appearing in the Court of Appeal before Justices Reese Harrison, Forrest Miller and Mark Cooper, Justin Smith QC argued his client sought name suppression owing to his concerns about undue media attention and public scrutiny of his investment, while other investors who had also withdrawn money still had suppression. In March, Justice Alan McKenzie in the Wellington High Court heard the investor withdrew $954,000 from the RAM Group in 2011, having originally invested $500,000 in November 2007 using a bank loan. The RAM liquidator, PwC's John Fisk, is seeking to claw back some of the $100 to $115 million lost in the fraudulent scheme for some 1,200 investors. Justice McKenzie's decision in the first such test case, which seeks to claw back up to $3.8 million that was withdrawn from the scheme, has been delayed as the investor fights to keep permanent name suppression. Wellington-based Ross built up a private investment service by word of mouth, producing regular reports for shareholders indicating healthy but fictitious returns. Between June 2000 and September 2012, Ross reported false profits of $351 million from fictitious securities trading as part of a fraud that was the largest single such crime committed by an individual in New Zealand. Mr. Smith said Ross was pilloried in the press and his client could fairly expect similar attention. The investor was also at a vulnerable stage in his career and had been dragged in willy-nilly, kicking and screaming to the test case, while other investors who had withdrawn money retained anonymity. Justice Harrison said the investor should understand that media attention was one of the slings and arrows of life and that news stories become fish and chip paper tomorrow. Jenny Stevens, appearing for Mr. Fisk, said greater disclosure allows other investors to understand the circumstances of Justice McKenzie's decision. Mr. Stevens argued there is a large group of unpaid investors who think it is some cover-up or conspiracy, which were live issues for the liquidator, and name suppression would add to that feeling. Mr. Smith argued name suppression would allow details to be included in Justice McKenzie's decision without being too heavily redacted. PwC's Fisk argued in the High Court in March that because a Ponzi scheme relies on new investors putting money in to repay earlier investors and prolonging the fraud, any repayment made belongs to the collective group of defrauded investors. As at June 16 last year, the liquidator estimated the realisable value of shares held by Ross Asset Management entities to be about $5.4 million, with estimated total realisations available for investors and creditors of $3.98 million. RAM's assets were frozen and receivers appointed in 2012 by the Financial Markets Authority after the watchdog received complaints about delayed or non-payment of investor funds. 2 other clawback test cases will be heard together in September. A decision on permanent name suppression has been reserved. To Sky City, just under half of the NBR subscribers voting in a poll on the subject believe the approved design for the controversial Sky City International Convention Centre is neither good nor bad, just bland, although a significant minority consider it iconic. It was announced last week that the government and the casino operator had finally agreed on a design for the centre destined for downtown Auckland after Sky City had to return to the drawing board earlier in the year in the wake of the government categorically ruling out any taxpayer funding for the project's ballooning construction costs. Media releases from both Sky City and the government noted the centre will have slightly less capacity than originally envisaged in the ultimately rejected preliminary design, with room for a total of 3,150 rather than 3,500 delegates, and a plenary capacity of 2,850 instead of 3,000. At the time of the announcement, NBR pointed out that's actually significantly less than the capacity for 5,000 delegates that Sky City originally pitched to the government, as detailed in the Controller and Auditor General's report on the deal. However, while declining to comment on the accuracy or otherwise of the OAG report in general, Sky City's General Manager Communications, Colin Espiner, rejects the idea the company ever made such a commitment. He says Sky City never pledged to build a 5,000-seat convention centre, and its earliest plans were for a 3,500-seat venue. That was downscaled to 3,000 during the design process last year, and after confirmation from the government that there would be no public funding for the project, further consolidated to 2,850 seats in the convention centre's theatre. Mr. Espiner says the new convention centre can still hold conferences up to 3,150 people, which is in excess of any conference held in the Australasian region last year, or indeed any conference New Zealand would be likely to host. He He said for a one-off special event, such as a concert or a state occasion, the NZICC could comfortably accommodate 4,200 people. Since the announcement, the government has also released an evaluation of the new deal by KordaMentha. It states the impact of the changes to the proposed transaction is that the Crown is receiving more contribution from Sky City than was envisaged, thanks to the gambling operator increasing its spend commitment by $28 million to $430 million and signalling it may end up spending as much as $470 million. That's prompted Economic Development Minister Stephen Joyce to declare the negotiations a victory for the government and taxpaying public, saying the original deal was evaluated as being cost neutral and that the changes are to the net benefit of the Crown and the taxpayer. However, KordaMentha has noted it had specifically not been asked to address other issues that would improve the value of the deal to Sky City, including the benefit of the possible hotel and any impact to Sky City from reallocating land. Sky City is now awaiting resource consent from Auckland Council for the project. If the consent is notified, it's believed it will delay the start of construction by a further 6 months. Yesterday, Standard & Poor's Rating Services announced it's affirming its BBB- issuer credit rating and related debt issue ratings on Sky City Entertainment Group Limited, noting the gambling operator's rating outlook remains stable. As for the aesthetic appeal of those plans, most of those NBR subscribers voting in a poll on the topic didn't agree with Ms Joyce's assessment of them as delivering on the promise of an iconic building that will enhance the central Auckland urban landscape. The convention centre will be boringly bland, according to 49% of respondents, while 18% think it will be an eyesore. However, a significant minority of 33% believes the centre will indeed be an iconic contribution to downtown Auckland. To the automotive industry, New Zealand sales of new vehicles declined in May, ending 41 months of increases as demand for commercial vehicles fell. According to the Motor Industry Association, some 10,034 new vehicles were registered in May, down from 10,064 in the year earlier month, and marking the first annual monthly decline since November 2011. Commercial vehicle registration slipped 2.2% to 3,191 compared with May last year, which was a record for the month, while passenger vehicles edged up 0.6% to 6,843. Sales of new commercial vehicles have been rising to records as buoyant economic conditions stoke demand from tradespeople and farmers. However, as economic growth slows, weak dairy prices crimp farm income and the New Zealand dollar declines, sales growth appears to be stalling. MIA Chief Executive David Crawford says while the market is still strong, it may be flattening out. Still, Mr Crawford said some people may be holding off buying new vehicles in anticipation of discounted prices during the annual agricultural field days this month. In the first 5 months of this year, total new passenger and commercial vehicle sales are 6% ahead of last year. New vehicle sales hit a record 127,179 last year, beating the previous record of 123,247 from 1984 and ahead of the figure recorded for 2013. Japanese carmaker Toyota was the top-selling brand in May with a 16% market share, followed by Holden with 11% and Ford on 10%.
NBR. With a National Business Review smartphone subscription, you can read or listen to the latest from NBR online. And for a limited time, it's free. Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today and get free smartphone access to NBR online until August 31st. NBR doesn't do sport, weather or horoscopes, just timely, relevant, useful and insightful business news. So for business news you can use for free, visit nbr.co.nz/free.
NBR Radio on Wednesday the 3rd of June. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me Hamish McNichol, NBR reporter, and Andy Martin, Chief Executive of New Zealand Football. Welcome to you all. Andy Martin, just how surprised were you when you woke up this morning and heard the news?
Oh yeah, very surprised, very pleased. Expected it to happen, but certainly not this quick.
What do you think prompted this? What was it? The suggestion that Seth Blatter is going to be linked directly to these investigations? That was the tipping point?
I think there's two factors, really. I think certainly after Friday there would have been continued talks and advice coming to him from some of the senior players in football about doing the right thing, because the brand was getting ridiculed and tarnished, and I think the wider game, the players, the volunteers are all voting, on social media, etc., to say that he wasn't the man. So I think that's one that will have hit him hard. But secondly, obviously, the continued allegations and it seems to be heating up considerably over the last few days. It's getting very close to him in terms of people around him. There's some allegations about things may happen to him directly. So I think potentially there's something coming. It's certainly a big about turn from, if you remember seeing him on Friday, punching the air and chanting "Go FIFA."
Yeah, I suppose you guys at New Zealand Football must feel reasonably vindicated as well by your decision to vote against him on Friday or Saturday, whenever it was our time.
Yeah, sure. I think it's nice to be on the right side of the fence when the music stops, I guess. So we feel very vindicated. But look, we did what we believe was right at the time, given the information we had available. I've got to say, the New Zealand public got behind us last week, and some of the texts and emails of support that we had on Thursday and Friday were pretty humbling, to be quite honest. And I think testament to the way that football is starting to really grow in this country and the desire for people to see it grow and do well.
And are you pleased? Certainly from my standpoint, it doesn't seem to have impacted too negatively on the under-20s at the moment. There still seems to be a lot of interest in the actual tournament itself.
I don't think it's had any negative impact. In fact, it's probably put the profile of the competition up in that people are talking about FIFA, football, and we're sort of directing all of that interest back to the 20s competition. And the competition is going fantastically well. I mean, we're seeing some great football. We're seeing some future superstars. And, we've now got a situation where on Friday, the New Zealand team have a cup final, which could see them through to the next stage.
Now, of course, you were expecting Seth Blatter to appear. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Are you expecting a replacement from FIFA to be there for the final?
We haven't had confirmation either way, to be honest. Thursday night last week, he was coming, provided he got elected. I think there's a lot of other things going on at FIFA right now, so we haven't had any confirmation at this point. So I would be surprised if he came, but this morning, obviously, the announcement said he would continue in his role until a new president was elected. Let's wait and see, because I think, to wait until December, January, February, whenever the new election takes place, there's going to be a lot of people clamouring for that to happen quicker.
Why does it take so long to sort a replacement? We're not talking potentially about somebody being appointed until as late as December.
Well, you've got to remember this is a bottom-up process, so nominations will come from the 209 member countries through their confederations. And so the Congress or the statutes of FIFA suggest there is an agreed position that 4 months' notice must be given on an extraordinary general meeting. So that will be given pretty soon, I think. And then the important thing now is to just pause and get the best field of candidates available so that they can have time to present their manifestos such that everybody can have a look at them. And, last week Prince Ali did a fantastic job. We spent time with him and we were sufficiently impressed to support his campaign last week. And so he's going to, I would imagine he'll stand again. I think there's been some talk that's been confirmed this morning. He'll be a hard act to beat, but there will be other strong acts. If you take, for example, Michel Platini, who has always said he wouldn't stand against Blatter. Well, now he doesn't have to. But he'll have a lot of support coming out of UEFA. And there'll be other names who appear as well that we've just got to assess and determine who's right for us.
So other than those names mentioned, is there anyone that you sort of would see maybe who hasn't even been bandied around, but someone that you would maybe think could do good in the role, or is it too hard to say this early?
Again, a bit early to say, to be quite honest. I'd say it's not the sort of job that you can advertise and get people to apply for. That's the frustrating thing, because if you did that, you'd get some fabulous candidates from around the world, from business and sport. But unfortunately, it's an elected process that comes from confederations putting nominations forward.
So it's more a political process than based on merit.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what's important to distinguish right now. FIFA's getting hammered at the moment, but actually the employees at FIFA, these people are employed for their skills and capabilities and do a great job. That's not the people that are the issue here. The issue is the people who are elected through this bottom upwards process, where they could start life in a football club in a very small country somewhere, find themselves elected to be the country's president, then the confederation president, and then they end up in FIFA. So it's a very different set of circumstances that see these people rise to the top.
And just finally, what is this going to mean, do you think, fundamentally for the new president coming in? This is a sport now that is very, very tainted by these allegations. How much and to what extent is it going to take to be able to remove the stain which now has been, applied to FIFA itself?
I think, look, the grassroots of the game is massively strong. This is the global sport, the global language, and that won't have been impacted by this. I think people would have been frustrated, sort of stakeholders, participants in the sport, where they've seen their love, their passion being tainted by something along the way away in Zurich, and something that felt, totally disconnected to what was going on in the reality, in the grassroots of the game. So I think that'll repair very quickly. I think the cloud has been lifted this morning because this is the start of the change agenda. Blatter's been around for a long time, and don't get me wrong, during his regime, FIFA, through their development arm, have done some great work around the world, but that's not enough when you've got this sort of corruption flying around. So I think, certainly for us in New Zealand, we're trying to reposition football as, one of the top sports in the country, because obviously you're used to other sports here. And we're winning that battle, and we could do without these sort of, brand damage statements that we've had over the last few days. And so now today, confidently, we can say that's gone. There's a change coming through, and it's okay to be associated with football.
Andy Barton, Chief Executive, New Zealand Football, and Hamish McNichol, NBR reporter. Thanks for joining us on NBR Radio.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.